All right, folks, today we're going to show you how to drop this Recone kit into this subwoofer. Today we're going to go ahead and recone this Nightshade version 4. Now this particular video is going to cover all Sundown tooled frames that are 10-inch and 12-inch. This particular model is an NSV4, but this video will work for pretty much anything that has this particular frame right here. Now, the easiest way for me to explain this would be, let's give you all the models here that this works for as of the filming of this video. So all 10-inch and 12-inch models that, let's start with the X Series first. So it's going to be all X Series woofers from version 1 all the way up to version 4. It will be Z Series woofers, so starting with ZV4, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So ZV4 up to ZV7. The ZV3 and below are a different frame. This will also work for all Team Series woofers. Now, we never made a 10-inch team. We did start off with a 12-inch and work our way up to 18. It will work on SDDNs. So the SDDN 10-inch through 18, well, we're working on 10s and 12s right now. So the 15 and 18 are going to be a different video because they're done slightly different. Not that much different, but I wanted to kind of split these up just so you know exactly how this is done. And then it will work on all Nightshades from, let's see, Nightshade version 3 all the way up to the current model, which is a version 6, and probably a version 7. So again, that's going to be just the 10-inch and 12-inch models. So when you order a Recone kit, and you can get it right at sundownaudio.com, this is what it's going to look like. Your Recone kit is going to consist of a cone with a surround on it, a spider, a coil, and everything glued together. That way you don't have to worry about glue. Also, the newer models that work in these frames, your leads are soldered to the ring terminals as well. So you don't have to worry about any soldering when it comes to dropping in a Recone kit from Sundown Audio. Make sure your Recone kit does come with a dust cap. Your dust cap will need to be sanded, and if you guys remember, we had a video on how to prepare your woofer and your Recone kit to get it ready for reconing, and sanding your dust cap is one of those things you have to do. I usually suggest using an old sanding disc. You just want to scuff it up. We'll go over that here shortly. When you get your Recone kit, you want to inspect it. You want to make sure that everything's straight. Now, sometimes in packaging, your spider might be a little bit weeble wobble, but in general, you want to kind of look at it, make sure it's all straight. Everything looks good here. You want to make sure your leads are soldered. Everything looks good here. You want to make sure there's no glue that's cracked or spilling or going through the center joint there. Everything looks good. Now, this particular customer that had this woofer, this is actually a custom built Recone kit. This customer went with an epoxy cone, which you can do. You can ask us for epoxy, and he actually went with a black spider instead of a red spider. The black is a little softer of a suspension, and this customer wanted to hit a slightly lower frequency range than what the normal Nightshade would reach. If you want a custom Recone from us, instead of going to our website, you want to email us or give us a call. So now that we looked over our Recone kit, we made sure everything was straight and true, and our dust cap is with us, we're going to go ahead and dry fit this woofer first. Now again, folks, we did do a video on how to prepare your subwoofer and get it ready for the Recone kit. If you haven't watched that video and you want to know what tools to use and how to get everything prepped, make sure you watch that video first, because there's going to be a lot of stuff you missed. Now, looking at this woofer, I went ahead and I sanded down my landings. If you're not sure how to do that, make sure you watch the previous video. I'm going to wipe them down with alcohol here shortly. There's no junk in the gap. If there's any junk in that gap, guys, your Recone kit's useless. Make sure you blow that out. You get any metal, any chunks of anything that's inside the gap. It's extremely important that you do that. So I'm going to go ahead and dry fit the Recone kit in this woofer, and I want to make sure that it fits before I go ahead and start laying down glue. Now remember, in the previous video I showed you how to do some shims. There's a couple different ways to go about it. Today I'm going to go ahead and use the shim that we have here at Sundown Audio. We do not sell this particular model for this particular woofer, but if you have a version 6 or if you have a X series or Z series, you can get a shim that looks just like this for that particular woofer. But let me show you how to make a shim just in case you don't feel like purchasing one from us. I have here two different types of material. I've got that transparent plastic material that's used for overhead projectors, and I have some standard printer paper. Most people are just going to go ahead and get printer paper. That's the easiest way to go about it. So let's show you that real quick. What you'll do, and this is a 3-inch coil, so usually the standard 8.5 by 11-inch paper works really good for 3-inch coils. So if you just drop that right in the gap there, as you can see, it fits pretty well. I do suggest getting a little bit oversized paper if you could, and you want this gap right here to almost touch when it goes all the way around. You do not want it to overlap, but almost touching is the best possible way to have a shim to make sure that it's centered all the way. You want to make sure that you have just enough paper to make sure that it slides in up and down, but it is tight but not too tight. You want to actually make sure that the Recone kit can slide in it. Usually it's going to be, depending on the woofer, anywhere from 4 sheets of paper up to 9 or 10 depending on the gap size, and every woofer is built differently. So you'll have to dry fit yourself. Having paper and have multiple pieces is the easiest way to go. So I don't know how many pieces I have here. Let's see if this paper shim fits. So what I do is I'm going to bend this around, make sure everything's straight. I'm just going to shove this down in there. And you don't have to line up your terminals at the moment. That doesn't matter. All right. So there we go. You want to make sure your spider's sitting down pretty decent. Everything looks good. Nothing is off-centered. Next thing I'm going to do while this is on a shim, I'm going to go ahead and line up my holes, this center hole. If you notice, there's 3 different holes right here. The center hole lines up with your screw hole. And I'm going to make sure that my leads line up with the terminals. Okay, so now I have my holes lined up, and I also have my leads lined up with the terminals. Now this particular woofer that I'm working on, I'm going to have to replace the terminal. That's the next thing we're doing next. So everything looks good and true. It's time to pull this out and start doing the next step. By the way, folks, I'm going to go ahead and do timestamps on this, so if you already know what you're doing when it comes to some portions but not others, or if you need to go back to a certain section, you can follow the timestamps and find your spot. So now that it's dry fit, I'm going to go ahead and put a new terminal in. This particular customer broke his terminal, so we sell what we call terminal blocks. Now the terminal block is something that we created. It works on these frames. It also works on some of our other frames as well. You can also upgrade, let's say for instance you have an SA version 2, you can actually take the bigger terminal block and put it on that woofer. As a little trick for you if you want to run some thicker wire to your Recone, to your subwoofer. Now if you want to change your terminals out, here's how you do it. It's a 7mm socket. There's a 7mm nut that the socket removes. You want to make sure everything's clean wherever your terminal is going. And check this out. The way you know how to put a terminal on is if you look straight at it, your positive side is always going to be on the left and your negative side will always be on the right. So when you put it on your woofer, positive is left, negative is right. That's on both sides of the subwoofer, and that's for every single subwoofer that we make here at Sundown. Unsure if the camera can see it, but here's that 7mm nut. I'm going to go ahead and just tighten that real quick. And there we go, we just changed our terminal block. I'm going to tell you this, now is the time to change your terminals. If for some reason you have to change your terminal block and the woofer is still good and or you're not reconing a subwoofer, it is a real pain to change that terminal with the woofer still intact. If you do have to do that, I would suggest using some really small socket drives Even something like this sometimes is not quite small enough. You gotta get in there with your fingers. It's a real mess. It's not easy to do because if you look, there's not a whole lot of room to get in there. So again, if you're going to change your terminal blocks, now's the time to do it while you're reconing the subwoofer. The 10 and the 12-inch models, the blocks are in the spoke. The 15-inch model, it's actually outside of the spoke in a gap, and it's actually a whole lot easier on a 15. 18s, they are in the spoke, but an 18-inch is huge and it's easy to get in there if you need to. So before we start working on things, it's always good to be safe. We're working with some pretty intense glue. So we want to make sure that our hands are safe, have eye protection if you need to, all that good stuff. Just be safe, guys. It's always good to do this in a well-ventilated area. Depending on the glue you're using, it may be hazardous to breathe in, so just be careful, guys. All right, so before I go ahead and drop my Recone kit in, I'm going to go ahead and use some alcohol and a microfiber towel, and I'm going to clean both the surround landing and spider landing. Having a clean prepped surface is the best scenario for your Recone kit. You definitely don't want your glue joints to not stick to the Recone or to the woofer. All right, now that that's clean, there's no junk in the gap there, it's time to go ahead and drop this thing in. This is the scary part, folks. We're going to use CA glue. CA glue takes like 2 seconds to dry. It's really fast, and you have to be very careful and you have to be precise when it comes time to use CA glue. You could use a 2-part epoxy. I generally don't suggest using a 2-part epoxy on a mega roll subwoofer. Mega roll meaning your surround is a mega roll surround. Anything with a standard roll, like for instance an SA, maybe a U series or an E series, something like that, you can probably get away with using a 2-part epoxy on the spider. You definitely can use it on the surround and the dust cap just like you could with these woofers, but talking about the spider itself, CA glue is the best to use. If you want to know more about the glues used, please watch the previous video on preparation. So we're going to use CA glue and an accelerant for that glue. Again, once I lay that bead down, it only takes maybe 5 to 6, sometimes 10 seconds, depending on humidity actually, will determine how fast it's going to set up. I'm talking about the first setup. Now, it does still take usually about 24 hours for it to be 100% cure. So we're going to make sure our landings are clean. I'm going to lay a bead of glue down. What I'm going to do, and I'll show you on the camera, is I will keep my hand steady with my glue. Now I will use this hand to turn the woofer using my Lazy Susan. And if you keep things stationary, it'll come out with a really nice glue bead. We've dry fit, we cleaned, now it's time to drop it in. Terminals are good to go, everything looks clean. Here we go. A few ways you can do your shim. If you're doing the paper shim, your shim will already be in there. If you have one of the shims that you can purchase from us, you can either put that in a gap, or sometimes it's easier to go ahead and start it off in the kit itself. You can go about halfway with it. There we go. And then you can go the rest of the way when you go to drop it in. So I'm going to go ahead and lay my glue. Remember, you have to line up your leads with your terminals and your holes, your center hole with the holes for the screws. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to lay my bead of glue down. I use a lot of glue. Some people don't use as much as I do, but you know, the more the merrier. It doesn't always look the prettiest when you use a lot of glue, but you know, it's good to make sure that everything's glued down and good to go. All right, so I don't have a lot of time. Make sure my terminals are lined up. Drop that in place. We're going to push down. Boom, good to go. I'm going to put a weight on here Any type of weight's good. What the weight does is it kind of holds that spider down and makes sure it stays in place. I want to make sure my spider is not peeking up anywhere. We're good. It's not peeking up anywhere. If we're good to go, we're going to go ahead and hit it with the accelerator. I douse the hell out of this thing with accelerator. Again, you don't have to be, you know, as strong with your glue and as crazy with your accelerator as I am, but you know, again, more the merrier. I also work in a facility where I have an abundant amount of glue and accelerator, so, you know, go for it, guys. And and just like in that prep video, I've got paper on the table. If you're doing this, it's okay to do it on the floor. You don't want to do this on your kitchen table and possibly get some glue on, so make sure you put down some type of protective barrier. That way if the glue drips on the ground, you don't have to worry about it. So essentially I'm going in here and I'm hitting the edge. Alright, so my CA glue is dry. It usually only takes a few seconds to get it dry. Your 100% cure time is usually still 24 hours, just depends on the glue that you're using. I'm going to go ahead and take this weight off. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flip up the surround. You always make sure that your shim is down 100% and it stays in until it's time to do the dust cap. So we're going to go ahead and flip up the surround. On the Mega Roll woofers, it's actually really easy. They actually stay up. If you're doing a standard roll surround, sometimes you have to hold it up by hand. So now this is sitting up. I have access to my terminals and the leads. So I have to go ahead and put my screws for the leads into the terminals. So this is a 3mm Allen, and I also have these little screws that they go to, and a lock washer. Now it's hard to get this on camera, so I'm going to explain to you what I'm doing. I'm going to go in from the top and then I'm going to put the screw and lock washer on the ring terminal. Let me see if I can get you a picture of that real quick. So here's what it looks like. I've got my Allen sitting up over. The screw and lock washer go right into that ring terminal, and then they're going to go down into that little hole right there. And then I screw it in tight. It's extremely important that you do this part before you do your surround. That way you can actually have access to the screws. Remember, the 10 and 12 inch models, everything's in the spoke and it's a whole lot harder to get to. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a tighten. When I do these, I generally put them on a 45-degree angle. I don't always keep the leads straight or 90 degrees. I'll kind of go on a 45. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I didn't go 100% 45 degrees, but you can see there's a gap right here. You do not want this to touch the frame. Even though the frame is painted, it could still arc over. Everything's tight and it's not 100% straight. It's just kind of out on an angle. One of the reasons why I don't go straight on with my leads and I go on a bit of an angle is because depending on which woofer it is that you're working on, sometimes that spider lip is right there next to the terminals. And you generally don't want your terminal leads to slap on the spider. It's just sometimes you get mechanical noise. So if you bring that lead and put it on an angle, you're less susceptible to lead slap. Alright, it should look something just like this when you're done with it. Now that my leads are tightened and ready to go, and I know my terminals are all set and ready, remember, red or positive is always on the left-hand side. Now it's time to go ahead and do the surround. Now before we get to the surround, let's talk about gaskets, because there's two different types of gaskets that we make. This particular model uses a rubber gasket. Now if you have a newer model, let's say the XV3 or newer, or maybe a ZV6 or the new Nightshade, those actually have metal gaskets. And I have one right here to show you. Now the metal gasket has screws that screw into the frame as well as the bigger holes that go to the standard holes that are already on the frame. If you're using a metal gasket, you don't really need to have clamps, maybe two clamps, and I'll explain why later. If you're using a rubber gasket, if you're using your old rubber gasket, then you might want to have some clamps. A fresh rubber gasket, you will not need clamps. The actual gasket itself will hold the surround down. So again, if you're using your old rubber gasket, use clamps. If you're using a fresh rubber gasket, you don't need clamps. If you're using a metal gasket, then it's good to have at least 2 clamps, and I'll explain here in a minute. Actually, let's go ahead and explain the metal gasket for a second. So when this surround is down, there we go. So when this surround is down and you put your metal gasket on, if you go ahead and you screw on one side, sometimes it'll want to lift on the other side. So if you take your clamps, you can actually clamp your gasket in place, then you can put your screws in. But again, this particular model just uses a rubber gasket, so metal gasket's going to get thrown over here. Okay, so let's get to the point where we're going to lay some glue down. Now I'm going to go ahead and use some E6000. You can use a 2-part epoxy for this part as well when it comes to the surround. Today we're going to do E6000. Now E6000 is a really good glue. There's also another one called Amazing Goop, but essentially you're just looking for like a silicone based glue. It may take like a 24-hour time period to cure. When I lay this glue down, I want it to be flat to the surface. Instead of putting it on an angle where a whole bunch of glue is going to come out, I'm going to lay it straight, flat, and I'm going to push my glue out at the same time and put a medium thick bead on there. Kind of hard to explain what that means. It may take you a couple tries to get it right. If it flows down, don't worry about it. Don't touch it. Let it somewhat dry. Then you can kind of peel it off and you'll be just fine. So with my surround up and everything's clean, I'm going to go ahead and lay my glue down. You might have to use your teeth to get that open. Boy, that was really on there. All right. Your teeth are another good, important tool to use, but not if you want to keep them for very long. All right. So I'm going to put my glue down on this edge right here. See if you guys can see it in the camera here. Again, I'm going to keep my hand somewhat stationary. I'm going to go around the holes. I'm going to use my Lazy Susan to keep things turning. I'm very right hand dominant, so everything I do is with my right hand, and my left hand turns everything. This particular glue, you've got a lot of time to work with it, so don't rush this. It's not like CA glue where you need, 5 seconds and you're like, ah! You don't have to rush with when it comes to silicone-based glues. Let's see if I can take a little picture of what this looks like here for you guys. Let's see, there you go. Not a lot, but just enough. All right, now with my glue down, I'm gonna go ahead and flap the surround down. And if you can see how it pushed out kind of weird there? You wanna get that back up. There we go. Make sure your holes are lined up. You want to push down anywhere where it's up. Now, this is where the part where if you have a if you have an old gasket, then you would use clamps. You would clamp, I would suggest about 16 of these. You would do where the holes are and in the middle between the holes. So it's 8 clamps plus 8 clamps, 16 clamps. Now, if you're using the metal gasket, you just put it down, and like I showed you earlier, you clamp one side, you clamp the other, then you go ahead and put your screws in. I don't need clamps today. I'm using a fresh gasket, and a fresh gasket is usually pretty tight. So here's how you do that. Okay, so you're going to line up your holes like that. I push the woofer against my chest. Usually I'll get it about halfway and then I'll spin it around and just go little by little. A fresh gasket is usually pretty tight, and sometimes you got to warm it up. If you're doing this in the winter time outside or even inside, sometimes you got to warm the gasket up to get it to be able to be a little more malleable. All right, so that's on there. I'm gonna take my thumb and I'm gonna push underneath the woofer or underneath the surround and push the surround out in all directions to make sure it's even all the way around. Didn't really have to do that much with this one, maybe a little bit over here. You want to make sure your surround is nice and even. There is some room for tolerance when it comes to where your edge of your surround is in conjunction to the edge of the frame itself. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but try to get it as cylindrical as possible, or as round as possible, so to speak. The more round it is, the more centered it is, the more chance you have of doing a really good job on your Recone kit. So now that is down, if I had clamps, I would let those clamps sit for 24 hours. If I was using my metal gasket, you'd be fine. So I'm gonna let this sit for 24 hours before I pull this shim out. All right, so now that I've let that sit for 24 hours, it's time to do the dust cap. Dust cap can be a little intimidating for some people. It was for me originally, but now I just slap some glue in there, throw it in, and it's good to go. Don't worry, guys. Especially if you're using E6000, if you get a bunch on the cone, don't take it off immediately. Let it dry just a little bit, then you can just peel it right off. So before I go ahead and lay the dust cap down and the glue down, I'm going to go ahead and scuff up the glue edge. So this edge right here, let's see. So this edge right here, I'm going to go ahead and scuff with my sandpaper. Doesn't have to look pretty. You just get it scuffed up, and essentially what you're doing here is you're giving grooves for that glue to adhere to. That way you have a better hold. All right, blow off the excess. Should look something just like that. All right, so a little trick for those who are a little intimidated about doing the dust cap. Let me show you this. So you take some tape, take a little bit off there like that, and roll it inside of itself. That's a lot. There we go. Mine looks a little weird. I don't do this anymore. It's been a while. Take your tape, put it on the dust cap, and you just made yourself a little handle. Just like that. Now you have something to hold on to. That way you're not sitting here like this, okay? Now I'm going to go ahead and lay the glue down. I'm going to put the glue down in two different sections. The first section I'm going to do the glue in is going to be this edge right here. I'm going to come down probably about 1/8 of an inch from that ledge. I'm going to lay my glue down flat, just like I did the surround landing. I'm going to hold this on an angle flat, lay my glued bead down, and then I'm going to come in with my dust cap. Instead of putting the glue on the glue edge, because that's where that landing is, I'm going to put the glue on the inside ledge. So when I flip this dust cap over, it's going to go ahead and drip down and touch the other ledge where the other glue is. Those two glue beads will come together and have a really good bond. So again, I'm going to glue right here. Not too much, guys. Again, if this pops up, which it might for me because I don't use E6000 very much anymore. I usually do epoxy, to be honest with you. But if it does pop up, it's okay. But you want to make sure you have coverage all the way around. Next, take my dust cap. I'm going to do the same thing. Start on this inside ledge. Work all the way around. Oh. The more the merrier on the inside, it's okay. Take my excess and just go like that. Right there, just like that. So now I'm going to line up my leads. So I've got my terminals on one side and terminals on the other side. Then the Sundown logo will go straight with that line. So I'm going to set my dust cap down. It doesn't matter, you don't have to do this. You don't have to line up your dust cap. That's just how we do it. So I laid my dust cap down. You can take it and you can give it a twist. Let's see here. I pull the tape off. I've got a terminal my logo and terminal. Everything's in a straight line. Now that my dust cap is where it needs to be, I don't have any glue coming out, so I did good there. I'm going to use a dust cap weight. These are 10 pounds, guys. We actually sell these, so if you want one, give us a call. They might be on the website for sale as well. But it is the exact curvature as a dust cap, and it'll fit right on top, just like that. Let it sit for 24 hours, and you're good to go. If you don't have a dust cap weight, something anywhere between 5 and 10 pounds is great. You don't want to put too much weight on this, but 5 to 10 pounds, maybe an old speaker you have sitting around, like an old 6.5 or something like that. Set it on top, let it sit for 24 hours, and there you have a freshly reconed subwoofer. Guys, this really isn't that hard. I know it may seem pretty intimidating, but it's really not that bad. If you do it 1 or 2 times, it gets easier every time you do it. I know I make it look easy, been doing this for years. You got this. Lazy Susan, dust cap weight, all the tools you need, E6000, CA glue. Make your life easy, guys. I think I did a pretty good job. The next video will be a 15-inch, and then we'll do an 18-inch, and then we'll get into doing like the SA and U series woofers. They're done slightly differently. And then maybe at some point we'll go ahead and do the 6.5s and the 8s as well. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Keep watching for more videos. You guys have a great day, and I hope your reconing experience was just as good as mine. Take care, guys.